Welcome to Jobs Learning Campus. Hope all of you have now redefined your teaching styles to meet the challenge of the learning environment of this pandemic period. This pedagogical exposition is a follow of my earlier one on RBT. The hallmark of an inspiring teacher is the ability to make the learner wonder and think. As an illustration, we will embark on a journey to the very frontiers of knowledge in a few basic concepts of science. I have used the principles of epistemology as a means to this end, that is, probing knowledge from four vantage points: its origin, nature, limitations, and methods. I have also used the flavors of STEM concepts to add depth to the grasped knowledge, a sort of T-learning. To make this mission enjoyable, several analogies, thought experiments, and metaphors are used as goodwill ambassadors. Now, before we move to the process, a few introductory ideas about epistemology and STEM. For strengthening the utility of RBT, epistemology, the science of knowledge, is utilized as a compass. Epistemology is roughly defined as a part of philosophy that engages in questioning our deeply held beliefs. As Aristotle pointed out, search for new knowledge begins in a kind of wonder or puzzlement. Many elements of the world around us may defy common sense. Most people are likely to stop their search at some frustrating point. Overcoming this inertia of mind is what epistemology attempts. For this articulation, the craving for new knowledge is quenched with the epistemological insight in four spaces: origin, nature, limitations, and methods. ONLM in short. We will probe the origin of a specific concept like gravity by tracing the history of its evolution, right from the 15th century, when the earth-centered concept of universe was the acceptable truth. The next space, nature, is probed in a wider range. It will be assessed in three interrelated domains: known known, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. Known knowns are most effortless to teach because that is what a standard textbook contains. Known unknowns, what the learner is inquisitive about, and unknown unknowns are what we try to predict, speculate, and wonder. The last two belong to the threshold of knowledge, discovering knowledge in its simplest form. We will discuss limitations of knowledge when we evaluate an old theory, say for example Newton's laws of motion, with a new one like the relativity theory of Einstein. Lastly, we will explore the methods used by great scientific minds, for example, logic and reason by Aristotle, experiments by Galileo or Faraday, and mathematics by Einstein and Dirac. Then, we will have a quick recap of the structure of RBT before taking up the topic of our interest. For professional education like engineering, knowledge acquisition and application evolves from four related disciplines: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, abbreviated as STEM. In this context, the word science refers to two hard sciences, out of which three major branches. That is, natural science, including physics, chemistry, and biology, and also the formal science, mathematics. The third major branch of science Social science, also called soft science, is excluded from this STEM grouping. The relation and differences among these fields are explained in the table. What it highlights is that good science leads to new technologies, which in turn needs the help of engineering for the products to reach the public or consumer. The products can be tangibles like a bridge or kitchen knife, or intangibles like a software or service. An engineer need not be a technologist or vice versa. STEM encourages collaboration. Here I am giving 5 major terminologies used in science research. Concept being the most fundamental, and a principle or a law consists of a chain of 2 or more concepts. Like in Ohm's law, we have to have some relationship between voltage, potential difference, current, etc. Other details you can read from the slide. Now we will have a brief recap on the revised Bloom's taxonomy. The taxonomy table was given in my first YouTube video, which I hope you have all seen. The two-dimensional relationship between the cognitive process and knowledge dimension is reflected in this Bloom's taxonomy table. In this slide, a list of 19 main verbs and 48 associated verbs are given. The teacher can adopt any of these 67 verbs while writing the specific objectives, but you can use the category words like remember, understand, etc. for writing the general objective. From cognitive dimension, now we will move to the knowledge dimension. The table shows the 4 categories of knowledge dimension. The first one, factual knowledge, is more related to remember, and it is stored in the rote memory. The second one, conceptual knowledge, is more important. As discussed earlier, concept is the smallest and meaningful fraction of knowledge, like an atom is related to matter. A group or set of concepts logically linked is like a molecule which can form different types of material. In this case, different laws or theory or proposition. Procedural knowledge is the how to do feature of the knowledge, like learning cycling. On the other hand, metacognitive knowledge, the last one, deals with the human side of the learner as well as the teacher. It monitors the attitude and emotion of the subconscious mind. The mindset and emotions of the learner is often neglected in traditional classes, where learning is considered only as a cognitive or thought process. With this brief introduction, we will now move to the topic of our dialogue. The 4 fundamental elements of nature, that is matter, mass, force, and gravity. Evoke this thought experiment to raise our curiosity and also to start our first step of this intellectual journey. Assume as a teacher, I am facing a set of students, first year undergraduates in science or engineering. Also imagine I am holding a burger weighing half kg in my right hand and a big pineapple of 1 kg in the left, keeping them at the same level of course, and then dramatically drop it together. Now I ask the group, which one will reach the ground first, the bigger pineapple or the smaller burger? Of course, you have to neglect the presence of air. How many of you got the right answer? Burger first, please raise your hands. Or pineapple? I find that both options there are takers. But for pineapple, it seems there are more. Since there is no agreement in the answer, I venture out in a lighter vein and offer a solution using my own common sense. The fat, voluminous burger will reach the ground first. After all, it is a fast food, is it not? Any disagreement? Let us probe together. How a traditional class possessing classical knowledge may have handled this problem? If this question was asked in a class of Aristotle in 350 BC, he would have totally opposed my answer. Aristotle argued that objects fall at a rate proportional to their weight. A 10 kilo ball would fall 10 times faster than a 1 kilo ball, and his view was accepted without challenge. For almost 2000 years, it was the truth. After all, it was pure common sense. The aristocrats among old generation of Greeks shunned experimentation because it involved doing work reserved for the lower class. They believed objects fell because their natural condition was to be down. Aristotle reasoned that this natural down condition must be stronger in heavier objects, and it was common sense that heavier objects fell faster. Any gap in knowledge they filled up with gods who were assigned special powers, like Zeus managed sky and was in charge of thunder. Let us go back in the timeline to about 1670s, and now our gurus are Galileo or Newton. Both of them would assert that Aristotle was wrong. They would say that the pineapple and the burger will reach the ground together with full comradeship irrespective of their mass difference. Galileo, with some inspiration from Kepler, had discovered the principle of relativity and the law of inertia by pure observation and experiment. By his Pisa experiments, he challenged Aristotelian view and showed that objects fall at the same rate irrespective of their mass. By 1610, he had formulated his time-squared law without a mathematical edifice. However, Newton, with his expertise in maths, would show the world how Galileo's science would look like, and he grabbed full credit for that. A teacher of a modern class adhering to this classical physics can teach the students why the big and small takes the same time to reach the ground. She can get Newton's universal law of gravitation along with the time square law as a prop. Have a close look at the two equations. The term mass does not appear anywhere. It gets cancelled out. The teacher can argue that irrespective of the difference in mass, the two objects will reach the ground together. If your students agree to this simple method of justification and do not probe further, they really lost a golden opportunity to discover many of the secrets nature holds dear and reluctant to share with those unwilling to be skeptic and question the common sense. We will now join a new set of students who are skeptic and inquisitive. We shall resume our exciting journey joining this group, moving to a modern classroom using RBT as a pedagogical tool. Wood engraving shown is a symbolic illustration of humankind's boundless curiosity about what lies behind the boundaries of our universe. Motion of celestial bodies always amazed the ancient, even before the beginning of recorded history. Most significant object was the sun, the very driving power of life. The prehistoric humans worshipped the sun as their primary god. Ra of Egypt, Inde of Incas, Apollo of Greece, Mithra of Rome, Surya of India, And don't forget Nippon of Japan, the land of rising sun. The way we humans made progress in science in the past can be compared to a relay race exchanging batons. The first runners were Pythagoras, Archimedes, Euclid, and others. But the fall of the great Roman Empire in 410 AD put a stop to their smooth progress. For the next 600 years or so, science had its darkest period. Matter was created by God, religion insisted. Nations were at wars. There was no time for any scientific investigations. The idea that matter is composed of large numbers of minute particles is surprisingly an old one. In about 500 BC, Leucippus and his student Democritus postulated the first atomic theory, evoked the name atoms, meaning uncuttable, because of the irreducible character of the smallest fraction. Later, Aristotle had used abstract reasoning and logic to find an answer to the mystery of matter. He classified them into four: earth, air, fire, and water, and later added a fifth one, ether. His universe was earth-centered. In 16th century, an orphan from Poland jerked the scientific world in a seismic shock. Copernicus shifted the centrality of earth in universe to the sun, contradicting the Bible interpretation of Catholic Church. Those days, anyone in Europe challenging the religious view of sun moving around the earth had to face certain death unless he repented. No wonder Copernicus postponed the publication of his extreme findings till his natural death. Later, Darwin committed the same kind of mistake. He challenged the human ego by tracing his pedigree to a stupid ape. But unlike the discarded theory of geocentric universe, Darwin's theory on origin of species is still not accepted by a large section of hardcore believers. By this time, Kepler had made the most of the stolen data of movement of heavenly bodies observed by Tycho Brahe. He also agreed with Copernicus. Universe is heliocentric. But the lucky Kepler managed to escape by dying at the relatively young age of 59. It was Galileo, a contemporary of Kepler, who displayed this bravery. Gifted in mathematics and astronomy, he buried the Aristotelian science which asserted that bigger bodies fall faster to reach its natural destination at a lowest level. Legend says Galileo demonstrated it by dropping balls of different masses from the top of the Leaning Tower Pisa. First time, science discarded logic and embraced experiments to prove scientific truths. Galileo's telescope went beyond the heliocentric concept to reinforce his explanation of gravity. He discovered moons orbiting Jupiter and added company to our lonely earthly moon. But he was not as lucky as Copernicus or Kepler. He lived long to suffer the indignity of imprisonment by the church for questioning the biblical view that sun was orbiting earth. In 1642, when Galileo died, God compensated the loss immediately by sending Newton in the very next year. Newton promptly caught up with the unfinished work of Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo and gave it a new mathematical incarnation. His book, Principia Mathematica, is considered as the most influential book in history of science. He was a versatile character, prolific as a physicist, mathematician, theologian, and at the same time spent considerable time in alchemy, a pseudo-science and predecessor of chemistry. How about Faraday, Maxwell, J.J. Thomson, Max Planck, Einstein, Riemann, Dirac, and other great revolutionaries of science? We will shortly meet them. while traveling through the timeline of broadening threshold of knowledge. Our next step is to frame the objectives of the learning outcome. For meaningful learning, we have to know something about everything, being a generalist, and everything about something, or the role of an expert. This illustration takes a middle path. Knowledge at a very high level is not required at undergraduate level, but care is taken to foster higher order thinking skills for the categories chosen. The best procedure is to start with specific objectives for the topic selected, and then to frame the general objective as an inclusive goal accommodating all the specific objectives. The how to think part of the objectives is taken care of by the cognitive dimension, with an option of describing the thinking process in 6 categories using as much as 67 verbs as already listed. The what to think part is taken care of by the knowledge dimension having 4 categories as given in a previous slide. For the first specific objective, we can select understand, the second major cognitive category. In this category, 7 verbs are available as shown. We choose explain. Both Galileo and Newton saw nature as in a Shakespearean drama, played on a stage where the 4 actors, objects, forces, space, and time, played independent roles without any mutual influences. Space was of 3 dimensions, an eternally unchanging reference grid following Euclidean geometry. Time was universal and steadily advancing, flowed at the same rate always everywhere. Gravity was a force between all massive bodies, always attractive, strength depending on the inverse square law. Newton derived his set of equations of motion in a special case of uniform acceleration. The traditional class teacher has already explained the free fall using these Galilean-inspired Newtonian equations. But as science was not satisfied, as it started investigating the micro world of atoms or energy or chemical bonds, the limitations of Newton's law became a hurdle. A lot of skeptic questions emerged, and we proceed to discuss questions. How we test whether knowledge was really transferred to the student? Is it by asking them to define matter, mass or acceleration, or just encourage them to connect concepts and find a solution to the problem? Let us try the second method. Ask the students the following questions. Encourage them to respond. Don't look for the correct answer. 1. What is matter? In everyday English, we may have a physical understanding of matter. Is it a body size, weight or density? Or is it something else? Question number 2. Acceleration. A passenger car has an accelerator to speed up the drive. If I say that its steering also is an accelerator, will you agree? Question number 3. Why a knife cuts a bread easily than a blunt object? We now move on to find how the concept of matter evolved and crystallized as an acceptable proposition or fact in both physics and chemistry. In 17th century, chemistry was known in a different name, alchemy. People wanted to become rich quickly by transmuting cheap elements to precious metals like gold. Even Newton was engaged in this activity. In the year 1661, Robert Boyle published his book, The Skeptical Chemist, and chemistry started its successful mission as one of the 4 pillars of modern science. In 1869, Mendeleev came up with a wonderful idea of classification of elements, a periodic table. He got his inspiration from a card game called Solitaire. Mendeleev assembled his table known elements at that time. However, physics and chemistry were investigating matter for different purposes. Chemist was interested mostly in the electrons taking part in chemical reactions. Physics searched more intensely the nucleus, where the strong forces of energy was hidden. Remember that electrons were discovered by J.J. Thomson only in 1897 and proton by Rutherford in 1910. It is time for the first formative evaluation. Purpose is to get a spontaneous feedback from the students on their learning experience. It can be done by asking them questions which probe the depth to which the learning has penetrated. It is a Socratic method, but care is to be taken not to intimidate the learners with high-flying questions not related to what was discussed in the class. In this case, we resort to two hypothetical questions. What will happen to Moon if Earth's gravity is suddenly turned off? Two options to choose from. 1. The Moon will continue moving straight ahead, leaving the blue dot behind, never looking back. Second option, it would immediately start falling to us. Its impact will vaporize our oceans, melt Earth's surface, and destroy all forms of life. Second question, if the Earth did not have the Moon as an orbiting partner, what will be our fate? Options. 1. Earth will orbit the Sun faster. 2. Tides will be more intense and more coastal areas will be submerged. 3. Earth will be more unsteady in its orbit and move around Sun like a swinging drunkard. Let the students try to answer it. If no correct answer is given, lead them to an applicable solution. Our second specific objective, we will probe the progression of science in displacement of Newton's action at distance theory by a more convincing force field theory. The initiative for this drastic disruption came from an unexpected source. Born in a London slum, Michael Faraday was a workaholic addicted to the cause of science. With no formal education and only with rudimentary arithmetic, he worked as a bookbinder's apprentice, and his curiosity led him to the contents of the valuable books meant for binding. This enabled him to acquire precious knowledge in science. Another good serendipity gave Faraday a helper's job with Humphrey Davy at the Royal Institution. This association launched his career as an experimental scientist. Meanwhile, in 1820, Ørsted had accidentally discovered that electric current can induce magnetism. Developing from this borrowed idea, Faraday inferred that current carrying wire could keep a magnet revolving in a continuous circular motion. His successful demonstration, shown here, was the forerunner to electric motors and his other subsequent discoveries. An earlier discovery on electromagnetism by Ampere gave new inspiration to Faraday. In 1831, he connected the two ideas of Ørsted and Ampere and discovered what we now call as electromagnetic induction. Faraday mapped magnetic forces by sprinkling iron filings on a piece of paper placed over the magnet. He concluded that this continuous line, which could be curved, were the carrier of force between the magnetic poles. Faraday later extended this magnetic field concept to electric field also and rejected the action at a distance principle of Newton. He said that another body could respond to one of these fields but not instantly at a distance as Newton postulated. The response was local to the condition of the field where the second body was located. It always took time for forces of field to travel. For instance, the light from Sun takes 499 seconds to reach Earth. In 1849, Thomson introduced the now indispensable term field of force or just field. We will now probe further on this new theory of field in more detail. Innovations happen by discovering hidden relationships between cause and effect. Maxwell's equations and Einstein's special relativity theory are good inspiring examples. First, we will attempt a simple explanation of Maxwell's four equations. Charge is a property of all objects, just like mass being a property of matter. If the charge is only static, it can influence only other charges. Same is true for a static magnet. It can affect only other static magnets. But the story is different if charge or magnet start moving. A moving charge will affect a magnet. A moving magnet will affect a charge. Cause and effect. Both electric and magnetic fields have magnitude and direction, and hence vectors. Acting in 3 dimensions, Maxwell used vector calculus for their analysis in a 3-dimensional Euclidean space. 3 physical quantities are involved: electric field E, magnetic field B, and the third one, force, appears in a different form. The 4 Maxwell equations can be represented in 2 ways: in integral form and in differential form. The differential form is used to show the E and B at a single point and useful for computer applications and study of electromagnetic waves like light. The integral form is used to compute them in a voluminous symmetric space. I have shown the more compact differential form with the Dell or Nabla operator. Both forms can be interchanged using divergence integral theorem or curl integral theorem. We will avoid specific details of these equations at this level, but just discuss the meaning of each equation. The first equation tells us mathematically how electric charges create electric fields. It is based on Gaussian law. The second law also is Gaussian. It implies that magnets have only monopoles, or there is no magnetic pole equivalent of 2 different kinds like electric charge. The magnetic lines always move from one pole to its pole partner, having twins pole by birth. If anybody finds in future that magnetic monopoles exist, then the second equation has to be modified. The third equation is developed from Faraday's ideas and hence called Faraday's law of induction. It reveals the dynamic consequence of a moving magnet. It will create an electric field, and the negative sign shows energy conservation. It is known as Lenz's law. The magnetic field opposing the electric field is responsible for its creation. It also implies that if the magnetic field does not change in time, the right side is 0 and there is no rotating field. What is the consequence of this? No motor or generator or transformer, no TV, no smartphone or any of the modern technologies. The fourth equation is a modified Ampere's law. It consists of 2 parts. The first term tells that moving electric fields can create magnetic fields. The second term is the sole contribution of Maxwell. It says magnetic fields can be created from electric fields. From this equation, Maxwell could predict the velocity of light to a very high precision, later vetted by experimental results. These 4 equations are the foundations of electrodynamics. But I should not forget to tell you that Maxwell arrived at these equations based on the existence of an omnipresent medium, the ether. Later, after about 40 years, Einstein had a thought experiment based on the 4th equation. He noticed that the 2 constants appearing in the equation, mu naught permeability, which is resistance of free space against formation of magnetic fields, and epsilon naught permittivity, which is the resistance of free space against formation of electric fields. And he asked, if the speed of light is an inherent property of space as represented by the above 2 constants, why the speed be any different depending on the speed of observer? The special relativity theory was born out of this thought. He also eliminated the need of ether to explain the dynamic behavior of electromagnetic fields. But we are now jumping ahead of time. We will take all this very soon. This is a group assignment. Students can be divided into 4 or 5 groups with a group leader. Their task is to study the diagram shown and answer the question given. Our scientific familiarity with force is from Newton's equation F is equal to ma. Science can't explain the metaphysical meaning of force, time, mass, energy and so on. What science can do is explain the relationships between these foundational concepts. The above Newton's equation is an example. There are other known forces like friction, atomic forces, positive or negative electric charges, magnetism, etc. Which forces are fundamental? Friction and interatomic forces are not caused by fundamental forces. Knowing laws of electromagnetism is enough to explain them. The only fundamental force of nature are electromagnetism, strong nuclear force, and weak nuclear force. The strong force acts only between the quarks, the constituents of protons, neutrons, and hundreds of other composite particles. It has a very short range, the diameter of a proton. All particles participate in the weak force. Due to its much lower strength, the weak force such as radioactive decay proceed very slowly. In the last 70 years, enormous progress is made in developing the standard model of particle physics. It is highly effective but not perfect or complete. The strong force is largely interpreted with quantum chromodynamics or QCD. We will take it up a bit later. Gravity is a known unknown. Einstein's theory of general relativity says it is not a force but rather the effect of non-Euclidean geometry. Gravity is proportional to mass, but all other forces, electromagnetism, strong and weak, are not. As done in classical physics, I have included gravity also as a force in the diagram which grades the four forces from weakest to strongest. Gravity is the weakest but responsible for holding together very large clusters of mass like galaxies. The electromagnetic forces keeping the electrons in their orbital path are the major players of chemistry, and the strong forces are the greatest sources of energy. When misused, can obliterate humankind as atom bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki taught us. How science explains these forces? The New Scientific American issue, October 2021, talks about a new force of nature. Very interesting and perplexing. We will see more about the strong forces as we take up quantum chromodynamics. This introduction brings out only the formative ideas on these forces. There are some interactions in nature which appear to our sense as forces, but actually are not. We will look at three such forces now. First, the Coriolis force. Remember that Newton's laws are valid only in non-accelerating coordinate systems called inertial reference frames. We are unable to recognize such accelerating coordinate system. Apparent forces due to such systems are called pseudo or fictitious forces. Earth's coordinate system is based on longitude, latitude, and elevation. It is an accelerating system because the coordinate axes change directions as Earth rotates. Often, we neglect these small effects but feel it while flying from east to west and from south to north. This Coriolis force is a pseudo force resulting from Earth's rotation. Another example we take is the centrifugal force. To understand this fictitious force, let us investigate how a washing machine dries clothes. Often, we get away with an easy explanation that centrifugal forces throw the water droplets out radially through the holes provided on the basket. But the truth is that the centripetal forces of rotation are insufficient to keep the droplets in a tangential motion, and it escapes from its grip by following its natural straight line path. In other words, the reference frame of this force is accelerating, that is the outer wall of the bucket which rotates. The centrifugal force imagined in this case is a fictitious force, same as the forces in play when a car is taking a turn in a traffic or while applying brakes. The body requires a safety belt to protect it from the impact of this pseudo force. Regarding gravity, we have seen in the previous slide the consequences of Einstein's finding. He said that gravity is not a real force like other three, but rather the effect of deformation of its path on a non-Euclidean surface. The curvature at each point in space-time determines the acceleration objects experience as they pass through that point. Hence, gravity also is considered as a fictitious force. As the 19th century came to a close, many scientists thought there was nothing much left for science to do. A set of universal laws were already delivered. Electromagnetic field theory of light by Faraday and Maxwell, Charles' law of gases, the zeroth law, the valency concept, ether, and so on. What the next century required was a messiah to take science out of this self-esteem. Max Planck did his part when he unveiled in 1900 a new quantum theory. This asserted that energy is not a continuous thing like water, but comes in quanta, individual packets. This theory energized science, but the burden of explaining the real world fell on the fertile brain of Albert Einstein. To appreciate this great genius, one must try to understand the totality of Einstein's life accomplishments. Slow in learning to talk as a child, expelled by one headmaster and proclaimed by another as unlikely to amount to anything, Einstein later became the patron saint of distracted school kids. In 1905, at the age of 26, as a functionary of the Swiss Patent Office, Einstein published 4 groundbreaking papers in an astonishing outpouring of creative insight. In March, he argued that light, long described as a wave, is composed of particles called photons, thus eliminating the need of either. 2 months later, in May, Einstein's calculations provided testable predictions of atomic hypothesis, confirming that matter is made of atoms. In June, he completed the special theory of relativity, revealing the plasticity of space and time to accommodate each other. He established that nothing can travel faster than light. He challenged Newton's theory of gravity, in which gravity exerts its influence across space. What was special about the special theory was that it dealt with things moving without accelerating. But what happened when a thing in motion, for example light, encountered an obstacle such as gravity? He solved this problem 10 years later. His final paper in November same year served as an addendum to his special relativity. In this, he came up with his famous assertion that energy is liberated matter. The matter is energy waiting to happen, a concept he rephrased in 1907 as the iconic equation E is equal to mc square. In the same year, Einstein saw a workman fall off a roof and began to think about gravity, and he argued that gravity and acceleration are the same. This event put him on an 8-year path to a general theory of relativity. The next 10 years, he worked on it and produced his greatest contribution to science, nay, to humanity, his general theory of relativity. The essence of this theory is that space and time are not absolute to the observer and the thing being observed. The faster one moves, the more pronounced these effects become. Nothing can be accelerated to the speed of light. The harder we try and faster we go, the more distorted it will become to the external observer, though the object itself will not see the change. To explain these concepts, Einstein discarded Euclidean geometry and learned the mathematics of curved space. In 1919, his prediction that sun's gravity should bend light was proved correct by an experiment conducted during a solar eclipse. From 1916 to 1926, Einstein made new contributions, now in quantum theory. Although Einstein had created the basis of quantum mechanics with his theory of photoelectric effect, he never completely shed the mindset of a classical physicist. He spent most of his later years attempting to merge the equations of gravity and electromagnetism within a classical framework, a so-called unified field theory. His Nobel Prize in 1921 did not make any mention of his relativity theories. It was given for his work on the photoelectric effect. Einstein's personal life was not without blemishes. His first marriage ended disastrously. After the war, he made several contributions to the movement but critics point out that but for his equation E is equal to mc square and his letter to President Roosevelt on the bomb, the world would not have faced the threat of nuclear weapons too soon. It is somewhat like blaming Newton for the gravitational forces involved in plane crashes. Einstein was a great admirer of Gandhi. He saw Gandhi's non-violence as a possible antidote to the massive violence unleashed by the fission of the atom. Facing two traumas, that of Adolf Hitler and the atom bomb, he became an active pacifist. Now we will look at his famous field equations carrying the baton of Maxwell but without the need of either. We live in a 4-dimensional world, but in our real life we see only a 3-dimensional slice. So as Einstein said, why give so much of importance to general relativity? Gravity was seen as a geometrical event involving Euclidean surface. It is illustrated in the two images shown. The first one shows the difference between a triangle drawn on a flat space and a sphere in Euclidean and spherical geometry. The second shows how the dictum that parallel lines do not intercept is not applicable on a curved surface. Two ants starting in a parallel path from the equator finally meets at the pole. Einstein searched for a new mathematics for application to a curved surface. His friend Marcel Grossman helped him to learn Riemann's curved surface geometry. Einstein used tensor analysis to develop his equation of general relativity, which is shown. The term of cosmological constant made the universe static, a notion later challenged by new discoveries, a universe expanding with acceleration. Einstein later removed this constant to accommodate the expansion, but even now the scientific world is in a dilemma whether to restore it or not to accommodate the dark energy concept. I am now leaving it to the students to find out the contributions of Schrödinger, Paul Dirac and Max Planck in the development of quantum theory. In this group assignment, students are required to look for applications of Einstein's theories in modern technologies. I am giving just one example here, the GPS system. I can also give some hint for four others like DVD player, CD, fission bomb, radioisotopes for medicine, or LHC particle colliders, taking advantage of the increased mass and lifetime of fast particles. For those who are curious to know the present status of our knowledge on the four fundamental laws of nature under our discussion, we can explore the new insights in two areas. Is it field or particle that is fundamentally the smallest building block of universe? And the second, how the forces interact with each other and with fields and particles. For this exploration, we start with the standard model and then proceed to discuss two field theories. First, quantum field dynamics or QFD, and the second, QCD or quantum chromodynamics. Then we will have a glimpse into some of the developments in quantum mechanics and also the modern lab facilities to do investigations on the unknowns of particle physics. The first point of discussion is the standard model, a target of intense scrutiny by an active group of modern physicists. The standard model of particle physics shows the elementary particles in a neatly arranged hierarchical table. It is considered as a holy grail by most scientists. In this model, particles are fermions and force carriers are bosons. There are 12 fundamental versions divided into two groups, quarks and leptons, both grouped into three generations. The quarks and gluons were discovered in 1970s and the massive weak force carriers W and Z bosons in early 1980s. The elusive Higgs boson in 2012. The table shows the charge, mass and spin of each. The major concern about this model is the indivisibility of quarks. Added to this, discovery of dark energy and dark matter has put fresh uncertainties on this model. The drawback of this model is that it explains only 4% of the normal material. The remaining part, the dark energy or dark material, is outside the rationale of this model. I am not going into a more penetrating discussion of this model. Those interested may refer to any book on advanced particle physics to satiate their curiosity. We have already seen the field theory postulated by Maxwell and modified by Einstein. Heisenberg, Schrödinger and Dirac refined these theories further, putting them in firm foundation. One of the basic concepts of the theory is that energy is not continuous. It is always packed in certain discrete lumps, replacing Faraday's idea of continuous fields. According to quantum field theory, basic fundamental building blocks of universe are the fields, not particles. Fields are like fluid. Ripples of energy waves becomes particles at high intensity concentration as shown. These particles can be virtual or real. In short, we all are not made of particles, we are all fields. Even in an empty space or vacuum free of particles, the field will be present. This leads to the concept of vacuum energy. Many scientists over decades helped to build a unified theory of quantum mechanics and electromagnetism or QED. The relevant charges involved are electric, which comes in just two varieties, positive or negative. In QED, electrically charged particles interact by shooting photons, the force carrier, back and forth between each other. An electron emits a photon and recoils, transferring its momentum. It is just like a gun recoiling after firing. In 1928, the first big step in this unification was taken by British physicist Paul Dirac when he published the Dirac equation as shown. While thinking about the meaning of the negative solution of this equation, Dirac had an epiphany, a sudden revelation. What does the negative solution represent? Is it not antimatter? This wild thought resulted in the discovery of a new class of matter, the antimatter. The first antimatter discovered was the positron in 1932 by the American physicist Anderson. The theory of the force gluon holding the quarks inside nucleus work a little differently. The theory governing this gluon is called QCD or quantum chromodynamics, which we take up next. The second field theory, QCD, is about the quarks inside the nucleus. It is the dominant theory of Standard Model that describes the action of the strong force of gluons holding the constituent quarks in place. The relevant charge is not the electric charge as in QED, but the strong force charge distinguished in separate colors red, blue and green. The particles that the color quarks exchange are not photons but gluons. Gluons are the force carrier of the theory, just as photons are the electromagnetic force in QED. Photons don't interact with each other, but gluons do interact. Major difference. Most of the ordinary mass of the universe owes its origin to this strong force. The strong force works like a rubber band getting stretched. More it is stretched apart, the retarding force increases, much unlike the gravitational forces. More details on these forces may be found out from advanced literature on this matter. This slide shows a comparison between the two theories QED and QCD. Main difference is that gluons interact with each other while photons do not. I have also shown in the previous slide that if the gluons move apart, the force to restore it back will increase proportionately. Do you imagine the condition of the universe if photons also interacted? We have so far not discovered gravitons, the imaginary force carrier of gravity. So we are unable to explain gravity with the help of gravitons, though existence of gravitational waves have been confirmed by LIGO experiments. Earlier, we had seen a periodic table from a chemist's viewpoint. In that, the configuration of electrons responsible for chemical reactions was the focal point. Here, I am presenting a new periodic table of a physicist. In this, the area of interest is shifted to the fundamental particles which are ingredients of all elements. The table shows all known fundamental particles of matter and corresponding antimatter. Nature has a way of arranging them to create its elements, but with new technologies, scientists have started creating new elements in their labs as a challenge to nature. As science makes progress, the future could unveil the mystery of dark energy and dark matter. Then this model may undergo a drastic change. Many of us are not very comfortable with a nagging thought that several paradoxes of the universe are still hidden by the nature. We may draw some comfort from this skepticism by getting inspiration from this mathematical equation. It may appear very intimidating, but it shows our current limit of knowledge in physical science. At least mathematics knows how much we know. On each part of this equation, highlight is given on what it represents. Many of the unknown unknowns lie somewhere beyond this equation. This equation does not explain the extra stuff, the invisible particles that is there, the dark matter and the dark energy. There are more invisible particles in universe than visible particles. We have to go beyond the Standard Model to understand some of the unusual behavior of nature. The most obvious area of future scientific investigation is the dark matter and dark energy. Other interesting questions will be, is time quantized? Is it possible to travel beyond the speed of light? Are we living in a multi-universe? Is there God governing the material and moral world, or everything is an illusion like the virtual particles? There may be an Einstein in future waiting to happen to solve some of these mysteries. I should not close this discussion with a pessimistic approach to the fate of this material world. The greatest scientific miracle that humankind has built so far is the LHD, Large Hadron Collider, which discovered the Higgs boson. It is currently being strengthened to find answers to many elusive questions that modern science could not answer. However, if this massive facility fails to find an answer, alternate action plans are also on the anvil. Scientists have found that a linear accelerator will be the best candidate to take up this new role. The design model is shown courtesy Scientific American. The proposed 24-kilometer long linear accelerator would collide electron with their antimatter counterpart, positron. The energy level needed is less but would produce cleaner data. Cost estimated is enormous, around $10 billion. The final stage of the session, we have now framed the general objective as shown. You may note that the highlighted two action words used, explore and predict, validate our desire to attain higher levels of knowledge as the outcome of this learning session. The session is concluded with a summative evaluation. This process helps the teacher to assess the learning outcome of the class just concluded. The students are required to present orally how they can connect the four concepts discussed in the class. The students themselves may be encouraged to fill up the gaps in their knowledge by bridging the knowns with the unknowns. Now we move to the task of mapping the RBT table. The action verbs of cognitive dimension guide us to identify the vertical column where the objective is to be located. Similarly, the knowledge level in horizontal rows which crosses the vertical column pinpoints the exercise cell where the objective belongs to. If an objective pertains to human attitudes and feelings, it is positioned at the metacognitive level. Under these guidelines, I have mapped the four specific objectives, activities and assignments in appropriate cells. This mapped table gives us a visual appraisal of the alignment of curriculum objectives and delivery methods. I would like to emphasize that quality of the questions set for the end semester examination play a unique role in the outcome of the learning process. If such questions are not of higher order thinking skills, students will have no incentive to move to analytical, critical or creative traits of the knowledge. The main purpose of RBT model is to ensure that the three components of curriculum, the content, the delivery and evaluation are complementary to each other and not in conflict. I have to point out yet another distinct feature of this illustrative class. Apart from RBT, we have used two other frameworks also to add value to the content of the curriculum. Next slide explains this supplementary element used to enrich the RBT model. You must have noticed that in each slide pertaining to objective, activity or assignment, I have inserted pointers for STEM for the four divisions of STEM: science, technology, engineering and mathematics. In addition, another tagging is done for the four sectors of epistemology: ONLM or origin, nature, limitations and methods. These classifications are used to create a unique table which maps the objectives in corresponding cells. This table appears on this slide. No planning is complete without a time frame set for the completion of the tasks. For the proposed class, this is done by using a pie chart which accounts for the entire 60 minutes subdivided into segments of 5 minutes or more. Hence, this process is called micro-planning. The timeline pie chart for the class is shown. The entire lesson plan is formally recorded in a digital document labeled as Format for Dynamic Lesson Plan or FDLP in short. It is dynamic because the digital nature enables easy changes to the plan depending on the classroom situations and the students' responses. A condensed version of the DLP format is shown. Needless to add that the actual document used for the class can be up to 3 or 4 pages. Now we have come to the end of the session. I hope that the time spent to view this video will be useful to you for organizing objective-oriented and intellectually inspiring classes for your students. I will shortly meet you to present another video on evaluation methods for open book tests. Thanks for your encouragement and suggestions.